I didn't know humiliation could feel so quiet. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just my name being spoken like it was already past tense. I was standing in the hallway outside my office when my mom said it. Not raised her voice. Not angry. Calm. Controlled. Almost gentle. You don't work here anymore. At first, I honestly thought I misheard her. I remember blinking. Once. Twice. Looking behind me like maybe she was talking to someone else. Because how could she be talking to me like that? In that place. In front of everyone. This office wasn't just a building. It was years of my life, compressed into walls and desks and deadlines. I had slept on that couch. I had cried in that bathroom. I had signed the lease with shaking hands because failure wasn't an option. And now she was standing there, blocking the doorway, like a bouncer to my own dream. I laughed. A short, nervous laugh. The kind you do when reality doesn't make sense yet. What do you mean? I asked. She didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. She was choosing her words carefully because she already knew how much damage they would do. This isn't your space anymore, she said. We've decided to make some changes. We. That word landed harder than the sentence. I looked past her and saw them. People I hired. People I trained. People who used to ask me for advice 5 times a day. Now they wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly very interested in their phones. Their screens, the floor. I felt exposed, like I was standing under a spotlight I never agreed to step into. I lowered my voice. Can we talk about this privately? She shook her head. Just slightly. Like I was being unreasonable. There's nothing to discuss. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a conversation. It was an announcement. My chest tightened, not from anger, but from disbelief. I had imagined 100 ways this place could end. Bankruptcy, burnout, bad timing, but never this. Never my own mother standing between me and my office door. I reached for my badge out of instinct. She held out her hand. I'll take that. My fingers froze around the plastic. That badge had my name on it, my photo, proof that I belonged, that I existed here. Handing it over felt like erasing myself. I wanted to argue, to list facts, to remind her who built this, who stayed when everyone else left, who kept the lights on when money was thin. But none of that mattered in that moment, because the decision had already been made without me. I slowly placed the badge in her palm. She closed her fingers around it. Click. Just like that, I was locked out. Someone cleared their throat behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I saw their faces, I knew I would break. And I refused to give them that satisfaction. Please collect your personal items, my mom said like she was reading from a script. Personal items. As if my life fit inside a cardboard box. I walked into my office one last time. My office. The chair still warm from where I sat earlier that morning. The whiteboard still filled with plans I would never get to finish. Every step felt heavier than the last. I started with the easy things. My notebook. My pen. The picture I kept turned face, down on my desk so no one would ask questions. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I could feel eyes on me. Whispered conversation stopping the moment I moved. This wasn't just removal. It was a lesson. This is what happens when you're no longer useful. The box filled faster than I expected. Years of work reduced to scraps and memories. I stood there for a second, staring at what was left. A clean desk. No trace of me. I wondered how long it would take before someone else sat there and pretended it had always been theirs. When I walked back out, carrying the box, the hallway felt longer than it ever had. Each step echoed, not loud, but deep, like something closing behind me. My mom didn't look at me. She didn't say goodbye. She just stepped aside so I could pass. And that hurt more than anything else. Because it told me this wasn't emotional for her. It was procedural. I stopped just before the exit. turned slightly, enough to speak without fully facing her. "You know I built this, right?" I said quietly. She finally looked up. And for a brief second, just one, I saw something flicker across her face. Doubt. Guilt. Fear. Then it was gone. "This is business," she said. Business. That word shattered something inside me. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. I pushed the door open. Cold air hit my face. The sound of traffic. Life moving on like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, box in my arms, trying to process how fast everything had changed. How quickly a place that once felt like home had rejected me. Behind me, the door closed. Softly, no drama, no final slam. Just a clean, quiet end. I walked to my car and set the box down in the passenger seat. Sat behind the wheel, hands resting, engine off. And that's when the humiliation finally caught up to me. Not as tears. As a question I couldn't stop asking myself. How do you go from being the foundation to being treated like a liability by the person who taught you how to stand in the first place? I stared at the building one last time and drove away, not knowing that this moment, this exact humiliation, was the beginning of everything they would soon regret. The silence didn't hit me right away. At first, there was just movement. The car, the road. Red lights turning green like they always had, like the world didn't care that something inside me had collapsed. My phone sat face down in the cup holder, dark and quiet, and I kept expecting it to vibrate. A call. A text. Something that would explain what had just happened. Nothing came. By the time I reached home, the box on the passenger seat felt heavier than it should have been. Not because of what was inside it, but because of what wasn't. No future plans. No place to go the next morning. No reason to wake up early. I carried it inside and set it down in the middle of the room, like it didn't belong anywhere else. The apartment felt unfamiliar, even though I'd lived there for years. Too quiet. Too still. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own thoughts too clearly. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood there letting the weight of it all settle. This was real. No office, no role, no voice, and worst of all, no explanation. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall, replaying the scene over and over. My mom's calm expression, the way she avoided my eyes, the word business, spoken like it erased everything else we had ever been. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. That's when the fear crept in. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady presence sitting beside me, asking questions I didn't want to answer. What if this is it? What if they were right to push me out? What if everyone I worked with thinks I deserved it? I imagined the office without me. My desk already cleared. Someone else sitting in my chair, laughing, acting like they'd earned it. I imagined conversations happening without my name being mentioned at all. It felt like I had been deleted. That night, I didn't eat. Didn't change clothes. I lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound outside. A car door closing. Someone laughing in the distance. Life continuing. I kept waiting for anger to show up. It didn't. Just this hollow, aching sense of being alone. Sometime after midnight, I picked up my phone again. No new messages. No missed calls. Not from my mom. Not from anyone at the office. That hurt more than the confrontation. Because it meant they were comfortable with my absence. I finally fell asleep in short, restless bursts. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that hallway, holding the box, feeling everyone's eyes on me. I'd wake up with my heart racing, reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Morning came too quickly. I woke up out of habit, my body still trained to a schedule I no longer had. For a second, I forgot everything, reached for my phone to check emails. Then it all rushed back. The box, the badge, the door closing. I sat up slowly. Like sudden movement might make it worse. This was the first morning in years where I had nowhere to be. No meetings. No responsibilities. No place that needed me. That realization was heavier than any workload I'd ever carried. I made coffee out of routine, not desire. The smell filled the kitchen, but it didn't bring comfort like it used to. I took one sip and set the mug down, untouched. I kept checking my phone, over and over, almost obsessively. Like if I stared at it long enough, someone would finally reach out. They didn't. By late morning, the isolation started to feel physical. Like my chest was wrapped too tight. I wanted to talk to someone, anyone. But I didn't know what to say. What do you tell people when your own mother fires you? I thought about calling a friend. Then stopped. I didn't want pity. I didn't want advice. I didn't want to hear, maybe it's for the best, or everything happens for a reason. I wanted answers. Instead, I got silence. I walked around the apartment aimlessly, touching things just to feel grounded. The table, the wall, the box from the office, still unopened. I hadn't had the courage to go through it yet. Like if I ignored it, the reality might soften. It didn't. Around noon, I checked social media and immediately regretted it. Photos, smiles, people celebrating small victories I no longer had. One post from someone at the office, talking about exciting changes ahead. My stomach dropped. Exciting for who? I put the phone down and stared out the window, feeling smaller by the minute. Not just unemployed. Disconnected. Cut off? That's when I realized something painful. I hadn't just lost my job, I'd lost my place. My sense of belonging. My daily proof that I mattered. And the person who took that from me wasn't a stranger. It was the woman who raised me. That thought settled deep in my chest. Heavy and cold. The afternoon dragged on. Time moved strangely when there was nothing to anchor it. Every hour felt both slow and too fast. I kept thinking, any minute now, the phone will ring. It didn't. By evening, the silence had taught me something cruel. If I didn't reach out, no one would reach for me, and that was when isolation stopped being a feeling and became a reality. I sat alone as the sun went down, the room growing darker, realizing that whatever came next, I would be facing it without the people I thought would never let me fall. And in that quiet, I understood something for the first time. This wasn't just a pause. It was a separation. And I had no idea how deep it would go. Survival doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with motivation or speeches or sudden clarity. It shows up quietly, after the fear gets tired of screaming. For me, it began the moment I realized no one was coming to fix this. The third morning after everything happened, I stopped waiting for my phone to light up. I stopped hoping for explanations, apologies, or last-minute reversals. That hope had been draining me faster than the panic ever did. So I did the only thing left. I got up. Not with confidence. Not with a plan. Just up, I showered, even though I didn't feel like it. Put on clean clothes even though no one would see me. Made the bed like it still mattered. Because if I let myself rot in that silence, I knew I wouldn't come back from it. I opened the box from the office for the first time. The smell hit me first. Paper, ink, that faint scent of a place I was no longer allowed to exist in. I went through it slowly. My old notebooks. Contracts with my handwriting in the margins. Sticky notes reminding me of things I used to care about deeply. And that's when something shifted. These weren't just memories. They were evidence. I started organizing everything on the table. Not emotionally, methodically, page by page, date by date. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. I just knew that my life's work wasn't going to disappear quietly. I set up a small workspace at home. Nothing fancy. Just a laptop, a notebook, and a chair that wasn't meant for long hours. But I sat there anyway. Hour after hour. I revisited emails I hadn't looked at in years. Agreements I'd signed in good faith. Messages where people deferred to me, asked for my approval, needed my decisions. It became clear very quickly that I wasn't just an employee in that office. I was the structure. And structures don't collapse just because someone decides they're inconvenient. That realization didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel focused. I stopped telling people what had happened. Stopped trying to explain myself. I didn't need validation. I needed clarity. I cut expenses, canceled subscriptions, stretched what little savings I had left. Survival meant being practical, not hopeful. Every morning, I woke up with one goal. Don't waste the day. Some days that meant research. Some days it meant writing. Some days it meant sitting in silence, letting my thoughts untangle. There were moments I almost broke. Times when doubt crept back in and whispered, "What if you're wrong? What if you really were replaceable?" But then I'd open another file, another email, another reminder of how much had been built on my shoulders, and the doubt would retreat. Slowly, I began to understand something important. They didn't push me out because I was weak. They pushed me out because I knew too much. Survival turned into strategy. I didn't rush. I didn't confront. I didn't threaten. I watched. I listened. I let time do what it does best. Expose cracks. People get careless when they think you're gone for good. When they assume you're too hurt, too broken, too embarrassed to fight back. They were wrong. I kept notes. Not out of anger, but precision. Dates. Names. Changes I noticed from the outside. Patterns forming where there used to be stability. Every piece of information felt like a small step back towards solid ground. There were nights I worked until my eyes burned, fueled by nothing but stubbornness and cold coffee. Nights where I questioned whether any of this would matter in the end. But survival doesn't ask if it's worth it. It just keeps going. I learned how to sit with uncertainty. How to let discomfort exist without running from it. How to be alone without disappearing. I stopped thinking of myself as someone who had lost everything. I started thinking of myself as someone who had been released. Released from loyalty that wasn't returned. From a role that required silence. From trusting people just because they shared my blood. That shift changed everything. I wasn't rebuilding loudly. I wasn't announcing my moves. I was rebuilding in the dark, where no one was watching and no one could interfere. And in that darkness, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control, not over them. Over myself. Survival taught me patience. Taught me restraint. Taught me that power doesn't always show up as force. Sometimes it shows up as waiting until the truth can't be ignored. By the end of that week, I wasn't scared anymore. I was steady, still hurt, still alone, but no longer lost, and that was enough. Because I could feel it then, deep in my gut, before any proof or confirmation arrived. Whatever they thought they'd taken from me, I was already learning how to survive without it, and that meant they had underestimated me in the only way that really mattered. The realization didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It crept in slowly, quietly, the way truth does when it's been waiting patiently for you to stop lying to yourself. It started with a single email. One I almost didn't open. I was deep into another late night, scrolling through old threads, half exhausted, half numb, when I noticed something that hadn't stood out before. A reply buried in the middle of a chain. A small phrase I had skimmed past dozens of times. Once they're no longer involved, we can move forward. I leaned closer to the screen. The date on the email was weeks before I was forced out. My stomach tightened. I followed the thread upward, then downward. Read it again. Slower this time. Not with emotion, just attention. And suddenly that sentence wasn't just a sentence anymore. It was a plan. I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall, letting that sink in. All those changes my mom had mentioned. All that calm certainty. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't reactionary. It was premeditated. I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief, because it meant I hadn't imagined the shift. Heartbreak, because it meant the betrayal went deeper than I'd allowed myself to believe. I went back to the documents. Cross-reference dates. Meetings scheduled without me. Decisions made in my absence while I was still physically present. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. I wasn't being corrected. I was being removed. Slowly. Quietly. Strategically. And my mom wasn't acting alone. That was the part that took my breath away. She wasn't the mastermind. She was the gate. The one person who could make it all seem reasonable. Professional. Necessary. I remembered how she'd avoided my eyes that day. How she'd framed it as business. How prepared she seemed. Because she was. I replayed conversations from the past few months. Comments that felt small at the time. Maybe you should take a step back. You've been doing too much. Let others lead for a while. I'd thought it was concern. It was conditioning. They needed me tired. Doubting. Willing to loosen my grip. And when that didn't work, they pushed harder. The realization hit hardest when I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding. Who benefited the most from my absence? The answer came too quickly. People who had always been one signature away from control. People who couldn't move freely as long as my name was on the page. People who smiled at me in meetings and spoke about me differently when they thought I wasn't listening. And my mom, she made it possible, not because she hated me, but because she believed she was choosing stability over loyalty. That's a hard truth to swallow. It meant she wasn't emotional, she wasn't cruel, she was convinced. Convinced that I would recover, that I'd land on my feet, that I was strong enough to absorb the damage so others wouldn't have to. I was collateral. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Every moment snapped into place. The sudden distance, the vague explanations, the refusal to talk privately. It wasn't about me failing. It was about me being in the way. That realization did something unexpected. It stripped the pain of its confusion. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I wasn't questioning my worth or replaying every mistake I'd ever made. The story shifted. This wasn't personal incompetence. This was structural displacement, and that distinction mattered. Because systems can be challenged. People can be exposed. I felt anger then. Real anger. Not explosive, but sharp and focused. The kind that cuts through fog and leaves clarity behind. I wasn't going to confront them emotionally. That would only give them the narrative they wanted. That I was unstable, reactive, dramatic. Instead, I leaned deeper into understanding. I mapped out the timeline. Who spoke to whom? When access changed. When my authority was quietly reduced. When decisions stopped coming across my desk. It was all there. Hidden in plain sight. The realization wasn't just that they planned it. It was that they underestimated my awareness. They assumed I'd be too hurt to look closely. Too loyal to question motives. Too respectful to connect the dots. They were wrong. And the most painful part, the part I had to sit with the longest, was accepting that my mom believed she was doing the right thing. That she justified it to herself. That she told herself I would understand later. Later had arrived. And I understood everything. Not just what they did, but why. And once you understand the why, you stop asking for apologies. You stop waiting for closure. Because the truth becomes its own kind of release. I wasn't angry because they pushed me out. I was angry because they believed I would disappear quietly. That was the mistake. The realization didn't make me reckless. It made me precise. And from that moment on, I knew the next phase wouldn't be about proving myself. It would be about letting the truth surface. Naturally, inevitably. Until no one could deny what had really happened. Not because I demanded it, but because reality has a way of correcting narratives built on convenience. And I was ready to let that happen. I didn't expose them the way people expect. There was no confrontation. No dramatic email sent to everyone at once. No shouting match or public accusation. That's what they were waiting for. They expected emotion, panic, desperation, something they could point to and say, see, this is why we had to remove them. So I gave them nothing. I let the truth do the talking. Exposure, I learned, doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be accurate. I started by doing nothing visible. No posts, no rumors, no messages asking for sympathy. On the surface, I vanished, and that made them comfortable. Careless. People reveal more when they think you're gone for good. I quietly reconnected with people who had drifted away over the years. Not to complain. Not to explain. Just to listen. To ask questions. To understand what they were seeing from the outside. Patterns started showing up everywhere. Things that used to run smoothly were suddenly delayed. Decisions stalled. Projects that depended on my approvals were being reworked because no one could quite replace the role I played. And instead of filling the gap, they blamed each other. That's when the truth started leaking out on its own. One person would mention something casually. Another would contradict it without realizing. Stories didn't line up. Explanations changed depending on who was listening. I didn't correct anyone. At the same time, I began sharing facts, not accusations, with the right people, privately, calmly, with documentation. No emotion attached, just, this is what I handled. This is what was agreed to. This is when my involvement ended. I never said why. I let them ask, and they did. The more questions they asked, the harder it became for the official story to hold together. Because the official story required me to be incompetent, unstable, or irrelevant. And the evidence said the opposite. Emails with my name on every critical decision. Contracts signed under my authority. Messages thanking me for solving problems no one else could. You can't erase someone who left fingerprints on everything. Word spread slowly. Not as gossip, but as confusion. How did this happen? Why wasn't this communicated? Who approved this change? Those questions started landing in the wrong places. And suddenly, I wasn't the problem anymore. I was the missing piece. I found out later that meetings were being called behind closed doors. Long ones, tense ones, people trying to explain outcomes without explaining the cause. My absence had created a vacuum, and the truth rushed in to fill it. Still, I stayed quiet. That restraint unsettled them more than any accusation ever could. Because silence, when paired with facts, becomes intimidating. Someone reached out to me directly. Carefully, testing the ground. I didn't realize how much you were doing. I thanked them and changed the subject. Another message followed a day later. There are questions we can't answer. I told them I understood, and that was true. I did understand. That's when the tone shifted. Concern replaced confidence. Urgency replaced control. They weren't trying to defend their decision anymore. They were trying to contain it. The exposure didn't happen in one moment. It happened in fragments, small realizations stacking on top of each other until denial became impossible. The truth showed up in missed deadlines, in financial discrepancies, in decisions that suddenly required approvals they no longer had. Every system has pressure points. They had removed the person who knew where all of them were, and now the system was pushing back. I heard about the panic secondhand. The rushed calls, the reassurances that didn't reassure, the way my name kept coming up, even though no one wanted to say it out loud. Exposure isn't about revenge. It's about inevitability. You don't have to chase the truth. You just have to stop protecting the lie. At some point, my mom must have realized what was happening. That this wasn't blowing over. that it wasn't something she could smooth out with calm words and authority. Because she finally reached out. Not with an apology. With a question. Can we talk? I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what it meant. They were no longer in control of the narrative. And they knew it. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence do its work. When I finally agreed, it wasn't to defend myself. It wasn't to negotiate a return. It wasn't to explain my feelings. It was to let them see the truth they'd been avoiding. Face to face, calmly, without raising my voice. By then, the damage was already done, not by me, but by their own assumptions, their own shortcuts, their belief that removing me would be clean and consequence-free. Exposure doesn't always end with punishment. Sometimes it ends with understanding. And sometimes understanding is worse. Because once people see what they did clearly, they have to live with it. I hadn't embarrassed them. I hadn't attacked them. I had simply stepped aside and let reality catch up. And when it did, there was nowhere left for them to hide. That was the moment the balance shifted. Not when I spoke, but when they realized they could no longer pretend I didn't matter. And that realization was already too late to undo. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came slowly, like footsteps you hear before you see who's approaching. By the time they reached me, I already knew why they were there. The first sign was the tone change. Messages that used to sound certain now felt cautious. Words like urgent and concerned started appearing where confidence used to live. People who hadn't needed me suddenly needed answers they couldn't find. And then came the knock. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour where the day starts giving up. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door without thinking, and there they were. My mom stood in front, hands clasped tightly, like she was holding herself together by force. Behind her were the same people who had stood silently when I was pushed out. The same people who avoided my eyes in that hallway. Now they couldn't look anywhere else. No one spoke at first. I noticed how different they looked outside the office. Smaller. Less certain. The power they carried there didn't cross the threshold of my door. My mom was the first to break. Her voice wasn't strong. It wasn't authoritative. It wavered in a way I had never heard before. We need to talk. I stepped aside and let them in, not because I owed them access, but because I wanted to hear what consequences sounded like when they finally found words. They didn't sit right away. They stood awkwardly, shifting weight, unsure of where they belonged. That alone told me everything. These were people used to control, suddenly without it. The apologies came in pieces, fragmented, uncoordinated. Each one different, each one trying to soften the same truth. We didn't realize. We underestimated. We thought you'd be fine. That one almost made me laugh. Fine. As if survival meant approval. As if standing back up erased what had been done. I didn't interrupt them. I watched my mom closely. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was scared, not of me. Of what she had unleashed. Finally, she spoke again. We made a mistake. There it was. The sentence everyone waits for, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt late. I asked one question. Which part? Silence. Because that's the thing about consequences. They force specificity. You can't hide behind general regret when the damage has a shape. Was the mistake pushing me out publicly? Planning behind my back? Choosing convenience over trust? Or was the mistake assuming I wouldn't survive without them? My mom sat down then, slowly, like the weight had finally reached her legs. I thought I was protecting everyone, she said, including herself. I nodded. Not in agreement, in acknowledgement. I know, I said. That's what makes it hurt. The room felt heavy after that, not tense. Just full. Full of everything that had been avoided. They talked about problems they were facing now: legal confusion, operational gaps, decisions stalled because no one knew how to move forward without undoing what they'd already done. They didn't say it directly, but the message was clear. They needed me, not because they valued me, because they felt the absence of what I carried. That was the moment they were on their knees. Not physically, but internally, dependent. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not triumph, clarity. I realized something important in that moment. Going back wouldn't fix anything. It would only confirm the belief that I could be removed and restored at someone else's convenience. So I didn't negotiate. I didn't ask for my position back. Didn't demand compensation. Didn't list conditions. I said something simple. I won't return. The words landed softly, but they hit hard. My mom looked up at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as her child, not as her subordinate, as someone she no longer controlled. But we need you, someone said quietly. I shook my head. No, I replied. You need what I gave you, and I can't give that to you anymore. There was nothing left to say after that. They left soon after. Not angry, not relieved, changed. When the door closed behind them, I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence that followed. It felt different now. Not empty, earned. The consequences weren't just theirs. They were mine too. I lost a version of my family that day. A version built on trust I thought was unbreakable. I lost the comfort of believing loyalty would protect me. But I gained something far more permanent: self-respect. I stopped measuring my worth by access to spaces that discarded me. I stopped craving validation from people who mistook my strength for expendability. I walked away knowing exactly what I was worth, because I had seen what happened when I was gone. And my mom, we speak now. Carefully. Honestly. Without illusions. Some relationships don't break. They reset. On different terms. Consequences don't always look like punishment. Sometimes they look like awareness. And awareness is irreversible. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I learned. And that lesson cost everyone involved more than they expected. Including me. But I would pay it again. Because being forced out of my own office taught me something no position ever could. The moment you stop begging to be included is the moment you realize you were never meant to stay where your value had to be argued for.